everybody, and welcome to today's session called Strategies and Opportunities for Gender Inclusivity and Diversity. We have a presentation from our very own subject matter expert, Vuyisa Mamanzi. So Vuyisa Mamanzi is part of the project management of our courses. She is part of the capacity building that we are involved in. And so in terms of diversity, she's able to give us perspectives from an African feminist perspective, but also inclusivity and what it means to the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm just going to let you listen to her presentation. And then after that, we're going to have questions and answers, and a few questions that I already have myself and some from the audience. So let me introduce her presentation.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Vuyisa Mamanzi from the University of Pretoria, working at the Center for Sexualities, AIDS and Gender. I am so excited to be one of the speakers for this summit. I look forward to a provocative and engaging discussion with you. Why gender inclusivity and diversity? You see, we all carry misinformation and stereotypes about people. We acquire this misinformation at a very young age in bits and pieces from TV, listening to people talk, from watching the expressions on our parents' faces, and from society at large. We also witness people being treated badly because of their sexual orientation or because they are not doing gender properly. And very often, it is these experiences that gets us started to have empathy, to advocate for gender equality and inclusivity. Developing a critical framework and fluency in language to think through social justice issues is vital. This will enable us to open up meaningful conversation about the moment that we are in, and to start to think about how to build institutional structures that are gender inclusive. I am one of those people who believe that we should all be feminists. A feminist is a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. The Gender Equality Changemakers program is one of those spaces where some people start to learn and develop fluency in language to think through social justice issues in their organizations and beyond. Our anchoring and guiding framework is underpinned by the key tenets of intersectional feminism. It is important to recognize and articulate the ways in which we experience discrimination and privileges based on the identities that we have. Intersectional feminism argues that identity vectors such as gender, race, class, and age, for example, do not operate in isolation from each other, but within broader systems of power. And these systems of power or structures of power may provide you with both opportunities and constraints. Individual subjects may embody and perform various social subject positions, which may overlap and intersect depending on the context in which people are located. And here, I would like to emphasize that how we see a thing is very much dependent on where we stand in relation to it. The Gender Equality Changemakers program has been designed to recognize the interwoven interconnections between power, oppression, and people's interconnected identity strands, with the saying, gender work is everyone's work. Therefore, an intersectional and feminist view goes beyond the idea that we simply put in place measures to promote women, but that we also interrogate how women can have multiple identities. And if we don't address underlying power systems, we end up doing superficial work. We recognize that gender itself is a contested terrain. Gender equity recognizes that women and gender diverse people are not in the same starting point or position as men. This is the result of historical and social disadvantages. Therefore, it is important to understand that gender equity is the process to achieve gender equality. And gender equality refers to the equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of men and women, girls and boys, irrespective of being born male or female. It is not just a woman's issue, it must also involve and fully engage men. The central thrust of this work is that it is to illuminate and explore the ways in which global gendered arrangements intersecting with ideologies such as capitalism and its deep connections with patriarchies, for example, position all gendered identities and bodies in relation to power and oppression, making the feminist angle one of inclusivity, safety, and acceptance. Inclusivity. What is inclusivity? Inclusivity is the practice of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. Diversity. What is diversity? Diversity is the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientations, etc. However, in speaking about diversity, there's also a risk of stereotyping, particularly in organizations. Intersectional feminism allows us to recognize and accept that every individual has multiple identities, and leaders should support their employees to ensure that staff competencies are valued. Enable a work environment that allows your employees to feel confident and comfortable in bringing their true selves to work. Gender equality is a basic human right, and it is fundamental for sustainable future. Sustainable Development Goal number 5 aims to achieve gender equality by ending all forms of discrimination, violence, and any harmful practices against women and girls in the public and private sphere. It also calls for the full participation of women and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of political and economic decision making. This involves building institutional structures that last. We need to recognize that discrimination is rooted in the historical and economic processes. social processes used to create and maintain social control and to produce and reproduce social inequality. Discrimination thus becomes part of the social struggle for power, and difference is transformed into inequality. Therefore, fighting any form of discrimination requires the recognition and efforts of both those who are discriminated against and those who aren't. The fourth declaration of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development states, as we embark on this great collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind, recognizing that the dignity of the human person is fundamental. We wish to see the goals and targets met for all nations and peoples and for all segments of society. And we will endeavor to reach the furthest behind first. What this means for me is that we need to build alliances of consciousness because this work is hard and it is organized around long-term issues like gender equality and inclusivity. What will it take? It is about the critical questioning of ideas and the doing of it all. First, one must be able to recognize the symbolic and material value of hegemonic identities as they become manifested in social relations. Second, a critical diversity literate approach demonstrates analytical skill at unpacking how systems of privilege intersect, interlock, co-construct, and constitute each other. The third criterion is a reading of oppressive systems in terms of their current manifestation rather than strictly as objects relegated to history. The fourth criterion of a critical diversity literate approach is that an understanding that social identities are learned and an outcome of social practices. In order to be able to provide a diversity literate analysis of a social context, it is imperative that one is in possession of a diversity grammar and vocabulary that facilitates a discussion of race, racism, and anti-racism, and the parallel concepts employed in the analysis of other forms of oppression, such as those employed in critical class, feminist, and disability studies. This is the fifth criterion of a diversity literate approach. 6. Stein's notion of critical diversity literacy requires that one have the ability to translate or interpret coded hegemonic practices. The seventh criterion is that one employ an analysis of the ways that diversity hierarchies and institutionalized oppressions are mediated by class inequality and inflicted in specific social contexts. The eighth and final criterion in Stein's notion of critical diversity literacy is that an engagement with issues of transformation of these oppressive systems towards deepening social justice in all levels of social organization. Lastly, Stein also added that it is critical to address the affective component of transformation work. Thank you.
Vuyisa. Thank you so much for that presentation. And I think you explored a lot of what gender equality has to offer, but also you looked at the Sustainable Development Goals and what it means for people to be capacitated, you know, in terms of gender. You looked at different toolkits that can be useful and different ways of thinking that can be useful in order to gain and to achieve gender equity, as opposed, you know, as a way and as a pathway towards actual gender equality. That equity, I liked what you emphasized, you know, equity as what you need to get to equality. And that was really, really powerful. So what do you think are the barriers to achieving that equality?
The barriers are many. And in what we have observed in our line of work, when we are looking at gender equality, and particularly gender issues, is that we are dealing with a social phenomenon that is deep-rooted. People are socialized over years to be and to operate and to navigate spaces in particular ways. Certain bodies and identities or ways of being become naturalized over the years. They become the norm, right? And when now we try to do the work, we always encourage people to self-reflect. And oftentimes what happens is that when people are challenged, right, about the privileges that they hold, or their dominant positionalities or subjectivities, people resist. Because what it means then is that I need to give up something for someone else. My position of privilege is now challenged and I may lose something. And that is uncomfortable for a lot of people. So those are the sum of barriers that we experience and come across in the kind of work that we do around gender equality, because people do not want to let go of their privileges. And sometimes this has to do with a sense of entitlement. Yeah.
Yes. No, entitlement is very, very, is something you must really challenge, you know? It's the barrier to progress. It's a barrier to awareness raising. It's a barrier towards community building as a whole. And, you know, education is now becoming about, you know, community building and starting up new ways of thinking and ways of doing that are putting gender equality at the forefront, but are new ways, you know, even the fact that we are part of a digital university. I mean, that means that knowledge is being disseminated in a different way, privilege is being challenged. You know, the hierarchies as well of at work are being being troubled, and there's a struggle against it. Yeah, so definitely, I think there is a struggle against it, and there's been progress. I think what you're also stating is the progress of it all, and the fact that there are organizations that are ahead in terms of menstrual leave, in terms of recognizing that the staff live lives as well, and they are human beings who need well-being, you know. So taking into consideration gender equity measures that are being put in place towards and towards gender equality. So they put towards it. That's exactly what you've just emphasized. And I just like to also ask you, what in terms of policy, you know, people speak about gender quotas, people speak about you having gender audits. What in terms of policy do you think should be passed to really achieve gender equality? What is the current thread or trend rather?
With the legislation and policies that we have around gender equality and equity, the current trend is that we have these policies. However, right now you spoke about the progress, and indeed we need to acknowledge that there is progress. But speaking about progress, not enough is being done fast enough. We have sort of lost the sense of urgency in terms of needing to be where we need to be, in terms of the numbers and inclusion, right? So oftentimes, yes, we speak about policies and legislation, we have these, but when you look at the implementation or organizations or the way in which these legislations are being looked at by organizations, some organizations feel that these are unrealistic policies or legislation that government is enforcing on them. So the openness to actually implement these policies is the trend. So we are lacking in terms of fully engaging with the legislation and policy and adequate implementation for us to see the change that we need. Because what we see in this work is that, yes, we talk about the inclusion of women, and we oftentimes reduce it to numbers, right? We open up our organizations, we have these women, but when you speak to the women about their experiences in these organizations,
that's where the experiences, yeah, that's it.
Yes.
The experience is everything, and I think you emphasizing that is really, really critical right now, because you know it's about like strategizing about implementation,
yeah,
rather, because there are all these policies around. I just want to thank you on that note for such a wonderful session. I thank you for your insights. And you continue to be a progressive subject matter expert, right? So thank you so much for joining the session.
Thank you so much.